I thought it's quite a funny title, Hiding and Seeking, because when you're giving a session on Zoom, especially like this, then kind of everybody's hiding. You get all these sort of screens, and it's kind of hard to see what anyone's thinking or feeling. So it's kind of a different sort of hiding, isn't it? But let's jump straight in, ladies, and we are going to talk about Megillas Esther because Purim is on the way. And for those of you who are not counting, that means if Purim is on the way, that means Pesach is very soon afterwards. So having done hiding in the Megillah, we're now seeking out our comets. If you haven't started Pesach cleaning yet, please be happy because nor have I. Okay, so let's start first with Purim. Okay, think about, I'm going to just put in here very quickly. So I know there's a lot of chiyus we need. I also want to think specifically about those of Klal Yisrael who are stuck in the Ukraine at the moment, Kiev, Uman, all those places. So can we just have them in our thoughts as a chus as well? The Purim store, as well as, of course, all the people who are chaylim and ill and need our spiritual support. So, thing about the Purim story is that you hear it when you're very, very young. Like everybody gets it. My daughter just came back from Eretz Yisrael, and she said, even in the kindergartens, even the one where the kids are tiny, even the kindergartens where the kids might not be yet religious, everybody knows the Purim story. And the way you learn it when you're young is it's a nice typical one, this girl that nobody knows, and finally she saves the day, and isn't it wonderful, and we all have a party. And as you get older, there's bits of it that are actually quite disturbing and distressing. For example, Esther doesn't actually have a happy ending for herself. She stays in the palace the rest of her life with a very unpleasant man as her husband. She is the queen, but Ahasuerus is not the nicest of husbands. He says he loves her, but as a person, morals very low, very bad habits. And even the way we learn the story when we're little is, like it all happens very quickly. Actually, it didn't. It took over 10 years from start to finish. It's kind of collapsed into a little bit when we look at Purim. So at the risk of saying things that you knew before, I'm going to quickly just whip through, not too quickly, I know, right? Just go through the Megillah. We'll go through the Purim story as we read it, just to make sure that we're all sort of, holding in the same place and in the order everything happens. I'm going to add here that all the good bits of this, the mistakes are all mine, but all the good bits of this share come from some of my great teachers, Rav Mattis Weinberg, Rabbi Pavlov, and also an incredible share I just heard from Rabbi Jacobson. So that's the good bits. The not such good bits are obviously mine. Okay, so we have, as you know, ladies, I'm looking sideways because I'm looking in a source. It's not because I'm avoiding you. Okay, we have, as we know, a king called Achashverosh. He starts off as a stable boy. He's a very common birth, and he ends up in a kind of a military coup. He becomes a dictator in Persia. And it says he rules from Hodu and Kush. He has 127 provinces, whatever that means. And he has a series of feasts to celebrate, to not even that, to consolidate his rule, to show how wealthy he is. We're not going to go to them in detail. He has one massive big feast that lasts half a year, and at the end of that he has another party just for the closest people and the people in his capital. And at that point, we know the story, he's been getting drunk for a while. His queen Vashti, who actually is noble born, she's the daughter of Belshazzar, who was the king of Babylon, and he calls for her to come. It says to come in royal apparel. Chazal tell us that means only in her royal crown and nothing else. She doesn't want to come. He gets rid of her on the advice of his advisors, and then gets a little bit stuck because he needs another queen, right? We know that bit. And we know also that, and because part of that story, remember, looking at what's hidden and what's not hidden, is he ends up sending a letter through his provinces telling everybody that wives have to listen to their husbands and they have to speak the language of their husband's house, and various sort of pointless comments like that. Either way, they go looking for another girl to be the new queen. Now, you have to bear in mind also that although this might be an honorary position as the queen, the morals of the Persian court were pretty low, and their excesses were pretty dramatic and very strong. They were well known when you're looking at sort of, as something that's symbolic in Judaism. Every Asian nation has got its sort of symbolic way of life. Their way of life, they're symbolized by, sort of bodily desires and bodily requirements. So, it was, for a nice Jewish girl brought up in a refined kind of way, it would be appalling to have to end up in Achashverosh's harem, because what would happen is you would spend the night with Achashverosh and then you would go off into his harem because you've been with the king once, so that was it. And you would only ever turn up if he would call for you again by name. So if not, you know, so this stuff everyone goes on about these days about objectification of women, that was it, right? It was pretty horrible. And they find this young lady who is known in the pasuk here as Esther. Okay, we know she's also called Hadassah. She's name is Esther, and she is being brought up by her uncle Mordechai. She's an orphan, and that's really important to remember. So she gets carried off into this palace somehow or other, despite all her attempts at not making herself particularly beautiful. She ends up finding favor in the king's eyes and being queen, and 9 years pass. So it is not all at once. It's not, oh, the next day something happens. 9 years later, we get the advent of this chap that we all know. You can boo now and bang your feet. I can't hear you anyway. You're muted. And that's when Haman comes in. Okay. We know this bit, so I'm going to skate through it just a bit. We know that Haman becomes extremely powerful, and start thinking for a minute about what the Jewish people in Shushan were doing. Okay, start thinking about what the Jewish people in Shushan were doing. Think about how they were feeling. At the time, they would have felt like, you know, we'll go into the history in a little bit, but what they're doing. And we know also that Mordechai goes to the palace, and until now, Esther had not said where she's from. The king has tried very hard to find out. He's given a whole tax rebate to whichever nationality she is from, and she's still not telling him. Right? He's tried anything, but she hasn't said anything. And at this point, Mordechai comes to her. She sees him outside, and you know the dialogue that happens. He says to her, "You have to go. Remember this. We'll come back to it. You have to go to Achashverosh and ask him to take back his order to kill the Jews." Okay. Remember how that order's come about. Haman has gone to Achashverosh and said, "I want to get rid of the Jews." Achashverosh said, "Well, they're kind of the holy people," and Haman has said, God doesn't care about them anymore. They've kind of forgotten. They're spread out here. They're spread out there. They're not even listening to him anyway half the time. You know, they don't even like each other. Don't worry, God will be all right with it. You don't have to worry about God too much over here. Achashverosh has said yes. Okay, and Mordechai has found out about it. So when Mordechai tells Esther, go to the king, she says to him, well, I can't do that. He doesn't even know who I am. I don't have a name for him, and he hasn't called me. They have a conversation, and Mordechai says something very important, which we'll get back to. He says, if you're quiet at this point, then it says they made a song about it. That Hashem will sort us out anyway. If he's going to sort us out, he'll sort us out. And then he says, and I'm going to want to make sure I find it exactly. He says, right, bear with me, I've got to find it. He says, who knows? Who knows if this is the reason why you're here? Meaning all this unpleasant, horrible experience you've been through until now. Who knows? Maybe that is why you're here. And that seems to do the trick, but she's got some conditions. She says, gather all the Jewish people who are in Shushan, and you should fast for me. Don't eat, don't drink for 3 days, and I and my maids will serve, and then I will go to and then I'm going to go to the king. And Mordechai goes off, and he does everything Esther tells him to do. Esther puts on her, she puts on her queenly clothes, and she goes towards Achashverosh. She goes to Achashverosh. We know what happens after this, right? She extends the scepter. She has her parties, and at the end of the day, after one thing another, you see Haman ends up going down. Esther goes up. Esther does save the Jewish people. There's a party. It's marvelous. Mordechai becomes prime minister, and Esther stays in the palace. Okay, so we kind of like skip that little bit out of the Purim story because we're focusing very much on the salvation, and it was a salvation. But we need to start looking a little bit about some of the elements that are going on under here, and maybe bring a moral and a message for us. Okay. As usual, ladies, I can't even see all of you because I'm sort of in the middle here. But if anything you want to join in or wave or shout, or I don't know how these things work. I think you can put hands up and that kind of thing as well. But anything that you think would work for you, I'm more than happy for any questions, comments, queries. I don't like talking too much, believe it or not. Okay, let's go back a little bit because we need to really put this into sort of a historical context. Can't talk today. Historical context. When's this taking place? So if you think about Jewish history, you have from the time we left Mitzrayim, from the time we left Egypt, went out of Egypt, got the Torah, wandered around the desert for 40 years, went into the land of Israel, had a period of judges, had a period of kings, first temple was built, and then long time after that, the first temple is destroyed. Everyone is sent off into exile into Babylon, Persia, and that's kind of where this is taking place. Follow it. So for the Jewish people at this point, it's a time of a lot of fear and doubt, not only in terms of who we are, but in terms of where are we going next, and really importantly, how are we going to get any instruction? When we went out of Egypt, there's this huge, big revelation of Hashem. Miracles, miracles, miracles all the time, right? Okay, Har Sinai, massive revelation of Hashem. When we got to with Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu, according to the Nevi'im, the prophets, Moshe is compared to somebody looking through a clear glass. Like if you look through a regular window, clear glass. When Moshe Rabbeinu dies and you have a series of prophets going all the way through the judges, the kings, and the first temple, it's compared to I think what's translucent, opaque, not sure what the word is. You know how some people have, like for their showers and their bathrooms, you have glass and you can kind of see shapes behind it, but it's not absolutely transparent, that kind of thing. So that's what we're talking about here, that kind of opaque, translucent, I don't know the word is for it, glass. That's what a prophet is like. But now we haven't had the prophets either. This point in history, there's none of them. And we're getting to the end of what's called the time of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, okay, who were wise people, learned in Torah, had a certain amount of divine inspiration, and we're between the time of them and of nothing at all, really. Not nothing at all. We had our Rabbanim, we had our Chachamim, and they had a certain amount of divine inspiration just because they'd been learning so much. But it wasn't the same thing as somebody who could just go and ask Hashem, what is the answer? There wasn't any form of direct revelation, of direct miracles. It's gone. There is no more of this. You find a little bit suddenly sparks up again by Hanukkah. There's a direct miracle, yeah, because the oil lasts. But basically, this is it. If you think in terms of day and night, we're moving right into sort of sunset and dark, okay? There is nothing much. And here are these Jewish people in Bavel, in Persia, in Shushan, and as far as they're concerned, okay, Mordechai is the tzaddik, is the Gadol Ador, he's the tzaddik. You have this bit of the Sanhedrin and the great, legal authorities left. They don't have any prophets. And they're here and they're in exile. And who are they going to listen to? Even back in the day, we used to have prophets and maybe we didn't listen to them, but at least they were there. You want to know what Hashem wants, you go ask a prophet will tell you what Hashem wants. Now what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to know? There's this incredible kind of confusion, and coming in with confusion comes doubt. It's much easier to believe somebody who tells you Hashem says this and comes with miracles than to listen to somebody who answers you just because because they know all the wisdom of the Torah. We have that these days, and we won't ask a Shiloh of our Rabbanim, our great Rabbanim. They know what they know because they are steeped in Torah, and they, as it were, know kind of what Hashem is thinking, as it were. But this was the Klal Yisrael's Jewish people at the time weren't used to that kind of thing. They were much more used to having absolute, direct, clear interactions, and they were losing it. They lost it when they went into exile, and it's gone. So there's a huge amount of doubt going on. Not just doubt, they knew Hashem's there. There wasn't that kind of doubt, but there's doubt about what's going to happen to us. Are we stuck now? We're just going to turn into one of the other nations. Maybe Hashem doesn't love us anymore. And it's not the first time that happened. Times happened in history before. One of the times that happened, the time we see it the most, actually, was in a parsha we read a few weeks ago, and we're going to read about it again the week before Purim. So I'm skipping back now about 1,000 years before the story of Esther. And I'm skipping back to when we left Mitzrayim. Okay, when we left Mitzrayim again, we said they had all these great big revelations, miracles. It's all very wonderful. Hashem saved us. We got out of Mitzrayim, and they crossed the Red Sea. They saw the Mitzrayim down in the Red Sea, and then what in front of them was the desert. The desert, right? So there's not a lot in the desert. That's why it's called a desert. Nothing, and there wasn't all of a sudden a major miracle. When there wasn't any water, Moshe Rabbeinu threw a tree in the water. Hashem told him how to do it. But by and large, it wasn't the same kind of, oh my gosh, earth-shattering miracles in quite big bang kind of miracles in quite the same way. And the pasuk tells us that at that point, comes a nation called Amalek, right? And we know about this, we're going over it, okay? What did Amalek do? It says the pasuk, I'm going to read it because we always read pasukim from the inside as much as we can, especially when it's written Torah, and especially at night. But it says, we've got a mitzvah, Zachar es asher asa la'acha Amalek, remember what Amalek did to you, baderech, on the way, but Seitzchem in Mitzrayim, when you left Mitzrayim, asher karcha baderech, when he met you on the way. Okay, and one of the understandings of karcha, there's lots of understandings of it. One of them means, says Rashi, happen to, like, just coincidentally, make something coincident. Another one means cool it down. So whatever he did, he met you on the way by Yizan Nevbach, right? And he did something, he was treacherous towards you, but the word zanav also means tail, remember that? Kol hanechesh shalim acharecha, all the weak ones who were at the back, and you were tired, and you were weak, and you were flagging. And Amalek didn't fear Hashem. And another point, and we see, I don't have it in front of me, I'm afraid, but we know the Jewish people at that point, these people were saying, they were complaining, and they were saying, is Hashem among us or not? And we know that Amalek attacked the Jewish people at that point, and we know that the way the situation was solved was because Moshe Rabbeinu held his hands up, says the pasuk, he held his hands up, and when he held his hands up, the Jewish people were winning, and when he held his hands down, they were losing. Okay, what's going on over here? Now, I know it sounds like nothing to do with Esther, but there's a lot of comparisons. First thing you need to know is that Amalek is the ancestor of Haman, and Haman is doing exactly what Amalek does. Okay, he comes at the same point and he does what Amalek does. It's sort of in his DNA, just like our forefathers' spiritual mission is in ours. Okay, what's the job of Amalek? Okay, he comes when there is doubt. In fact, the gematria of Amalek, you may know, is the same as the gematria of Suffolk, which means a doubt. So the nation of Amalek comes when there's a doubt. Now, it's not, says Rav Matis, it's not a doubt in Hashem. They knew there was Hashem. They knew he created the world. What's the doubt? These are the people Amalek hits are the weak ones. Doesn't mean necessarily physically weak. It can mean spiritually weak. They were at the back, right? So whatever they had done, and the commentaries talk a lot about what it was that they, why were they at the back? In what way were they weak? And they said, is Hashem among us or not? They didn't say, is Hashem there or not? Okay? They said, is Hashem among us or not? That self-doubt. Does Hashem love me anymore? Is he going to do for me now? And that's when Amalek came in. And it says Amalek met you on the way and he made you cold. That idea of met is like, you're just coincidental. You're not important. You're just a blob on the face of the universe. I went up into outer space. I couldn't even see you, right? You wouldn't even be there. I couldn't even, you go a satellite and you see lights of cities, but who are you? You're just a person. You're not anything important. That's what Amalek's saying. You anyway. You're a karcha. You're a mistake. You just happen to be there. The pasuk says he used a tail, made you like a tail, like an afterthought. Now, he couldn't have done that if they weren't already thinking that about themselves, because people can't tell us things that we don't already believe about ourselves. Okay, the worst insults are the ones that you kind of have a feeling they're true. Like if someone says something to you and you know it's not true, you don't really care. But when something's true, kind of possibly true, it kind of bothers you more. So Amalek comes in, and those are the ones he's attacking. The ones who have forgotten to believe in themselves, or have, for whatever they've done wrong, have thought that maybe Hashem just doesn't love them anymore. That is that doubt. And what happens? So Moshe Rabbeinu sits on a rock and he holds his hands up. Again, we will relate this to Esther in a minute. He holds his hands up. And when he holds his hands up, the Jewish people are winning. When his hands get tired, he has Aaron and Hur each side, and they're holding his arms up for him. Gemara says, what? His hands are going to make a difference? Like some kind of hocus pocus? He says, no. When the Yidden looked and they saw Moshe Rabbeinu's hands up, they davened, and then they got Hashem's help. And when they saw he stands down, they forgot to daven. You see someone pointing upwards, you think, oh yeah, I've got to ask him up there, meaning Hashem, right? And they davened. Meaning what happens? All these people who thought that they weren't going to make a difference, they saw Moshe Rabbeinu pointing upwards, they davened, and that's how they won, because all of a sudden their tefillas made a difference. Okay, that happened many, many years earlier, right? Okay, it happens in the Midbar. But back to our story, almost the same thing's happening almost the same thing happened over here, but took a lot longer to happen. So you have this party in Shushan. We know the Chazal tell us that Achashverosh's party, he actually brought out the clothes and some of the vessels from the Beis Hamikdash. It's a real big, slap in the face of the years, and Hashem has totally forgotten about you. You are just, you can have your nice cultural religion. It's a very nice culture, bagels and lox on Sunday, and light candles and have family time Friday night. But God, and yes, God may have always kind of forgotten about you. You're not very important, really. Okay, in the general scheme of things. And they didn't go to that party. They do go to that party, and we don't know what they're thinking. But we do know that when in the Megillah, almost straight after that, we have the rise of Haman. There's obviously some kinds of a link going on between the rise of this person from Amalek and how the Jewish people are feeling about themselves. Of course, there are some people who are different, okay? Mordechai's hanging on there, right? And you'll have all these people with very, very strong faith and all the rest of it, and they're hanging in there. But everybody else, they're like, okay, we'll hang on to it a little bit. But in general, there's one of the ways we can understand this is everyone's feeling a little bit abandoned. A bit abandoned and trying to having to try and fend for themselves. No prophets, no temple, none of the sort of things that as a nation we were used to. Really interesting concept, right? Chazal tell us that being abandoned feeling abandoned is the beginning of being saved. Right, give you an example. Right at the beginning of the Megillah, we told us, we said that Achashverosh was the king of 127 provinces, Sheva v'Esrim Me'er Medina, 127 provinces, and Chazal, our rabbis tell us that's a comparison with Sarah, who lived for 127 years, and Esther's going to be the queen of 127 provinces. But it's never that simple. It's never a surface level thing. Sarah was also, remember Sarah, she was also taken away against her will to be the wife of Parai. It happened twice to her, actually, also the wife of Avimelech. And there's nobody who can help her. She's by herself in the palace of Parai, again, man with pretty low morals, Avimelech, lousy morals. And she prays to Hashem to help her. That's where Esther's coming from. Somebody who's taken away, taken into a situation where she feels like there's no hope, and she wants to keep her own moral, standards, and she prays to Hashem help. That's Sarah. But there's other requisites for that. David HaMelech tells us in Tehillim, right? Remember David HaMelech is the ancestor of Mashiach. He says, Aviv imi azavuni. We say that in the Kapitel, we say in Elul before Rosh Hashanah, right? My father and my mother abandoned me, right? He was stuck out on the hillside. They thought he was illegitimate and he was going to kind of spurned by his family. He wasn't, but they thought he was. He was, abandoned effectively by his parents, by his family. He was stuck out on the hillside looking after the sheep, and he became the ancestor of Mashiach. And here's Esther, like Nebuch. Father dies before she's born. Her mother dies in childbirth. She's brought up by her uncle or her cousin, depending how you look at it. I mean, you don't get much, you don't get much more bereft than that. She's never really had, he's great Mordechai, but she hasn't really had that mother-father situation. Again, that kind of abandonment. And she actually says that, she says that, we'll talk about it in a minute. And then she gets to the palace and she says herself, Esther, she says it in her own kapitel. She says she wonders maybe when she's taken us that palace, and she knows she's not allowed to say where she's from, and she actually feels like maybe Hashem's abandoned her. There's a piece of Tehillim that we have. Sorry, excuse me 1 minute. I turn off all these noises from somewhere else. She says that she is she's by herself in the palace. She is got to go to Achashverosh. Okay, she's had the conversation, according to Chazal, she's had this conversation with Mordechai. She's told everyone to go and fast, and now she's going to the king. And I'm going to go through quite a few of the psukim with you, because it's going to give us an incredible insight. When Esther says this is her kapitel, it's kapitel Chav base, the very strong minhag. A lot of people say it on Tanis Esther on Purim as well. Okay, it's very strong kapitel. And look how it goes. It's quite incredible. Okay, so she says, Keli, lama azavtani, Hashem, why have you abandoned me? All right, she's starting with that. She says, I call during the day and you don't answer. And at night it's quiet. And then she has a question. She says, you're holy. You sit on the prayers of Klal Yisrael. Jews have always prayed for you. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted in you and they were answered. And she goes on, she talks about our forefathers prayed to you and got answered, right? So just think about, this is almost how the Jewish people are feeling, right? In the old days, they davened to you, they got an answer. She says, and here I am. I'm here, she says. And she says, Alecha hashlachti mirachem. I've been dependent on you from inside my mother. Don't go away, be far from me. Because the sorrow is near, and no one's fear. And then there's a lot of pasukim about how she feels, that she's surrounded by enemies, she's surrounded by bad things. And that previously she knows that people daven, but she's all by herself and she feels completely, utterly alone. Right? And she asks Hashem, don't be away from me. Save me from the sword, save me from all these bad things. And then she says something really interesting. Right? She says, I'm going to find exactly where we're up to. Something turns around. She says, V'ata Hashem, you Hashem, al tirchak, don't go away from me. save me. And she says, I'll tell your name to my brothers. When I'm with my people, with the people, I'll praise your name. Right? I'm going to skip a little bit. Because if she cuts in this ani, Hashem will not despise. Really important. Hashem will not despise. He will not look down on poor people, on people who are downtrodden. But like hister, remember that word hister? Hister is the same word as Esther. It means hidden, right? But like hister panav mimeni. He hasn't hidden his face from me. So yes, I felt abandoned, and yes, I felt like I was by myself. But Hashem wasn't actually hiding from me. It's a really important place. He's listening my cry. She says, I'm praying to you among the congregation. Remember that's really important. She says, Yachlu anavim, the humble people will eat for Yispal and they'll be satisfied. Yahalu Hashem, they'll praise Hashem, Darashav, those who look for him. Okay, and then it goes, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You can have a look yourself. Have a look one time, the translation, ladies. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, she says, here I am, and I thought I was abandoned, but when I'm davening to you as part of a kahila of people, and we'll get to that in a minute, but as part of a congregation, I know you're going to answer me, and I know I'm going to be praising you. So in the space of that capital, she's changed around from feeling like she's totally abandoned to feeling like, even though it's really important, even though she's humble, and there's a really lousy word for that, because anav doesn't mean humble in this sort of English kind of crawly kind of sense. It means, knowing who you are. Okay, Hashem will remember her. So something happens. Something turns it around for Esther, Queen Esther, that even though it looks like her whole life she's been abandoned, she hasn't really felt like, anything that Hashem's going to listen to her. And it definitely doesn't feel like it now. She's in the middle of a palace surrounded by idols. She's feeling green, she's fainting, she's fasting, Chazal described in a lot of detail, and she's going to beg for Hashem. Something happens as she's walking through her Farish that makes her that she's, or before that, we're not sure, she realizes, what is it that even though she feels abandoned, and even though to all intents and purposes doesn't look like anything's happening, something is. Let's have a look. Okay, there's actually two different angles we can look at, and Bezras Hashem will pull them together. Okay, the first angle is what's known in the trade as silence. Okay, Chazal tell us there's a midah of silence, and just like any other spiritual positive, it can be handed down. So we're told that Rachel Imenu had it, right? So we know that Rachel was silent when her older sister ended up marrying the husband her husband first, Yaakov first. Okay, the Binyamin, Rachel's son, had this midah of silence because he knew what had happened to Yosef and didn't say anything. Shaul, his descendant, had this midah because when he was crowned king, he didn't go around showing off about it. In fact, no one even knew he was going to be king because he knew that actually Hashem is the king and he was just a kind of this is sort of a temporary thing. And Shaul's descendant, Esther, has this midah of silence because she doesn't talk about who her people are. She keeps it absolutely quiet until the really last minute. That's one way of understanding silence, okay? So there's two sorts of silence. And it kind of fits in with this idea of modesty. How we said in the Tehillim that she says Hashem answers the modest. That modesty is not about, about being self-effacing and saying I'm a nothing. It's about kind of knowing who you are. So like we said, there's two kinds of silence. There's not saying words. Now, sometimes not saying words is a really important part of silence. Okay, but it's one of those ones that isn't recognized. Hi, I'm sorry. I'm just on the Zoom, darling. Okay, right. Shh. Okay. Shh. Okay. So the sort of silence which isn't words is something like this. We all know what happens when we think we have to say something, when we're scared of not saying anything. What tends to happen is we talk rubbish or we talk lashon hara. Right? You're standing in a group of people, and they're all talking and you don't have what to say, and you're thinking, gosh, they're going to think I'm so stupid, they're going to think I'm such a schmeral, they're going to think I'm going to say. So you quickly come up with whatever it is you can say, even if it's the most stupid thing, even if it's lashon hara, because at least you've got to say something, right? We're very, very good at being quite scared of silence and trying to fill it in the best way we can. So having an absence of words actually is really quite important, okay? And being able to hold back on words is in itself an expression of emunah, of faith in Hashem. Why? Because, for example, let's say I was after this session, you might not, but you might all say, gosh, Aidel, that was wonderful, that was marvelous, that was stupendous. That's lots of words. Okay, and I've used lots of words in sharing it. What I find, I've used lots of words in giving this class, and that's great, and I might get lots of praise from what I said. But let's say I thought of something I was going to say, and I decided not to say it because it would trigger someone's sensitivities. You're never going to know that. You're not going to know what I was going to say, and now I've chosen not to. Don't start thinking because there isn't anything. I'm just making that up. But who's going to know? Only Hashem. The only one who knows when we didn't say something is Hashem. And that's why, for example, the Vilna Gaon tells us every second we've got a juicy piece of Lashon Hara to speak and we don't say it. We're making infinite numbers of malachim, because the amount of effort it takes into every second of holding back words you don't want to be saying is huge. And it's extra huge because no one's going to know. Because if you go and say, well, I was going to tell you a nice piece of Lashon Hara, but I didn't, then that's called Avak Lashon Hara, and that's also forbidden. So that kind of holding back and choosing not to speak is an incredible expression of Hashem's watching over us and rewarding us, okay? Because otherwise, are you following, ladies? Well, you can't tell me. I'm just assuming you're all nodding, okay? Right, that's the expression of knowing that Hashem's watching us. That's one way of looking at silence. The capacity not to say things. My grandfather, Alav Shalom, used to say, some people have to have something to say and some people have to say something. So not having to say something in and of itself, not saying things, can be an incredible expression of emunah. But there's another level of silence. If you're musical, right, the reason music is musical is because there's gaps between the notes, right? If it's all one kind of drone, it was a musical. As soon as you break it up, da, 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 that silence is what makes the music. Otherwise, it'll be a drone, right? Even, writing on a page, what makes the writing is the spaces between the words. The Torah, there is a concept in Chazal that part of the hidden Torah, if you want, the Kabbalah people call it, is the writing behind the writing, the spaces between the notes. So the silence can also be, on a very deep level, the relevance of the space itself. Rav Pollack, who is an Av based in Boston, Reverend Pollack gives an example. He says, if you ask somebody doesn't keep Shabbos, and they say, what about Shabbos? You say, well, you can't do this, and you don't do that, and you don't do the other. And they say, what do you do? And you say, well, nothing really. And they go, oh gosh, how can you do nothing all day long? And you're thinking, oh my goodness. Well, actually, when you're a kid, you find it very hard, right? That's why we give kids Shabbos parties and this and that, anything just to keep them busy and make it a nice day. But once you've spent a certain amount of time, working and being in the world, doing that, which looks like nothing, that space between doing is very valuable, and it's very, very holy, and it's a very spiritual experience. That ability to have that space, silence in and of itself isn't just not words. It's its own entity, okay? Just like darkness isn't just the absence of light, okay? Rabbi Twersky, interestingly, had a story about himself. He wrote a lot of books on self-esteem. So he had a story. How did he get into that? He was having a very, very stressful career as the head of a psychiatric hospital in Pittsburgh. And he decided to go away for a couple of days to one of these health spas. And one of the treatments of the spa is you go into a dark room and you sit in some kind of a warm mud, Dead Sea, I don't know, some fancy water thing. And you sit in that and you stay in there for half an hour, and then you come out and you have the next treatment. And he said for the first 2 minutes, it was a machaya, wonderful, sitting in the dark, nothing to read, nothing to look at, nobody bothering him, no phones ringing, nothing, just him and the water in the dark. And it was a machaya. The next 5 minutes were less and less of a machaya, just sitting and sitting and sitting in the dark, with nothing to look at and nothing to do and no distractions. And finally, he gets out of the bath and he knocks on the door and he says to the attendant, right, I've had enough now, I'm coming out. And the attendant says, you have to go, you've got another 22 minutes to go. He says, what? I'm good, I'm nice and relaxed, and it's fine, let's do the next thing. He says, no, sir, we cannot give you the next treatment unless you've spent the whole half an hour in that bath. And he writes, Rabbi Twersky, it was the worst half an hour. And he came out realizing that what was so bad about being in the dark, in this lovely water, it's nice, it's calm, it's cool, there might be some sort of tinkly music in the background, I don't know. What was so bad about it? Why was it so awful? Because he was with himself. And he said at that point, he realized, if I don't like being just with myself for half an hour, then how can I go around treating everyone else? And that's when he started to work on self-esteem. So that piece, why am I telling you that? Because I like the story. But why else am I telling you that? Because when there's that quiet, when we're holding that silence, that's the bit where we look into ourselves and we know who we are. And we know we have value, or we should know we have value. It's the bit where we can communicate with Hashem and we can just talk to Hashem. So there is a concept a lot of people do called hisbodedus. People sort of go out into the fields and talk to Hashem. Some people do that very verbally, go and spat in the middle of the night in the forest, all shouting Abba, Abba. But you can, especially if you're a woman, you don't want to do that. You want to be a bit more safer and a bit quieter. You can talk to Hashem, but that piece of silence where you're just alone with nothing else isn't just no words. It's this is the place where I work out who I am, and this is the place where I work out my connection with Hashem. And what's happening at that point is the words, the ideas are, as we talked about, hidden. So we've talked about Esther hiding who she was, but a lot of our potential is hidden inside. And when we're busy with this and that and the other, and all the various things we have to say and we have to do, that thing that's hidden inside never really gets a bit of a look in. So part of this being silent, as well as holding the words for ourselves, is also this idea of having a space to connect with Hashem without everything else. I'm not the lawyer, the doctor, the mother, the daughter, the whatever else it is I am. There's just that piece of silence, right? Interestingly, a couple of interesting ideas. Okay, so connected with that is actually, go back again. We're dotting around Jewish history a bit here, ladies. You have to bear with me. Remember Eliyahu Hanavi? Remember Elijah the prophet? There's a bit in history. So again, this is before our time. There's a bit where he has to run away, right? He makes a miracle. It was in the age of prophecies and miracles and people, Hashem talking to people. And he has to run away. And he has to run away because he's got into trouble with the king and the queen of Israel at the time, especially the queen. She was very into idol worship. And he runs away, and the pity is it's just there on the shelf. I don't have it in front of me. He runs away, and he hides out on the mountain. It looks like he actually goes all the way into the towards Har Sinai. So he goes to where the original revelation was, and he's hanging out there in among the rocks and the stones and all the rest of it. And Hashem sends the birds to come and feed him. And at that point, Hashem comes to him and he says, "What are you doing there?" Now, obviously, Hashem knows what he's doing there, but he waits for the answer. And Eliyahu Hanavi answers what he answers. He actually does talk Lashon Hara about the Jewish people. He said they weren't listening, they were doing things wrong. But then Hashem asks him again, "What are you doing there?" And then, this is trying to make it, Eliyahu answers, and then, very famous piece, Hashem brings a wind, and the wind is so strong it breaks the rocks, and the earth is shaking, and there's a fire, right? And the pasuk says, and Hashem wasn't any of those. He wasn't in the wind, and he wasn't in the shaking, and he wasn't in the fire. And then comes a soft, kol damah madaka, that's a very famous phrase, a very soft, quiet voice. And that's where Hashem is. That's where Hashem talks to him. Says the Marbim. I read this Marbim on Shabbos, and I've been running around the place quoting it at anyone who will stand still long enough. It is quite a longie, but you're all sitting down, so you are a captive audience. This is the most astounding Marbim. Here's what the Marbim says. He says, the second time Hashem asks Eliyahu Hanavi, "What are you doing there?" He's asking him, "You're a prophet. You're supposed to be influencing people. You're supposed to be a vehicle for spiritual growth. What are you doing on a rock in the desert?" That's not how Jewish people do spiritual growth. We do with people, right? You want to influence people, you've got to be with them. You want to even grow for yourself. You can't develop your midas if you're totally by yourself. You have to develop your midas with other people. And when he sends the wind and the earthquake and the fire, one of the things that comes from Marbim, he's telling you, Alavi, is if you want to grow, and especially as a prophet, you want to be influencing other people and helping other people with their growth, it's not going to be yells and screams, and it's not necessarily going to be loud words, and it's not going to be inspirational acts of, nature miracles. It's going to be this very soft voice. And the Marbim compares this to another place in Tanakh, the Navi Yechezkel, who was the last of the prophets. Remember how we said that now in the Purim story, there's no more prophets? So Yechezkel was the last of the prophets, and he's actually the only prophet who's outside Eretz Yisrael when he prophesies. And he also talks about a vision of Hashem, which we're not going to go into because it's very Kabbalistical, but he also talks about a wind and the sort of thunderstorm kind of thing and the fire. And after that, the fourth thing, so those three are the same. The fourth thing is something called chashmal, right? Which, we're not sure, some kind of sparkle. But what the Marbim says, it comes from the words in Hebrew of chash, which means quiet, and malal, which means speaking. There's a space, ladies, between not saying anything and speaking. And that space is where that silent voice comes. The bit where the ideas are there, but they're still in potential, and they haven't come out with. That bit where there's kind of words, but no words, right? That bit where we're just holding on, accessing ourselves, accessing our own thoughts, accessing our own ideas without them coming out, thinking about who we are. That's the place where the growth comes. And having done that, whatever comes from that, stopping and hesitating and thinking, whatever comes out of that is the bit that leads to growth for ourselves and for people that we want to influence. That doesn't mean you have to be a teacher or a parent for that. It could be anybody that you want to have a good influence on in any way. So that's one of these ideas of silence, right? This idea of whatever we're holding inside of ourselves comes out. Let me give you another example of it. The Navi Micha, right? It's one of the last of the prophets, right? We have 613 mitzvahs. And the Navi Micha kind of condenses it into 3. Doesn't mean you don't have to do the others. He's trying to sort of like categorize them into areas. And he says, what does Hashem ask from you? Ases mishpat, to do justice, avas chesed, to love kindness, but and to walk modestly with Hashem, right? Walking at sneers, if people hear the word sneers, they go, oh, it's about a dress code. Walking modestly with Hashem does not mean anything about a dress code, okay? What it means is we give HaKadosh Baruch Hu a bit of space. We give him a space inside us, we give us a space inside him. So that which is such an important point of Yiddishkeit, is that giving Hashem a space inside us, as it were, because Hashem's everywhere, right? Giving our neshamas a little bit of a space to be heard without all the other stuff that's going on. And that level of silence we see is, again, just to put it into context, one of the things, what's making a difference for Esther, what turns it around for her? Because she's holding herself and she's gone inside herself and thought, okay, where am I holding? What's going on for me? But what if she would see it as a bad thing? What if she would look inside herself and say, maybe I'm not so great. We talked about that, didn't we? We talked about people who look at themselves and say, well, I've done this wrong and that wrong and the other wrong. And maybe there's something wrong with me and maybe Hashem doesn't love me anymore. We talked about how when they went out of Mitzrayim, there were Yidden who felt that way individually, and Amalek attacked. We talked about how maybe now in the Purim story, a lot of people felt that way. They'd done various things wrong. They'd assimilated a little bit here and there. And they also felt, maybe Hashem doesn't like me anymore. Let me tell you, it's an incredible concept. It's very bashar. I listened to this show the other day from Rabbi Jacobson, and it really spoke to me. So although I wasn't going to include this, I'm putting it in because it does tie in, okay? Remember how we talked about in the Pasuk, Esther Hamalka talks about B'chtay Kahal, as part of the congregation. I'm going to praise you, okay? Let me share this bit with you, okay? And sometimes we have to do this for ourselves, and sometimes we have to do this for other people. Sometimes our job is, even if we're okay with ourselves and we know Hashem loves us, we have to make sure other people know it too, because we are a part of a Gehilah. So we said, Mordechai HaSadik says, how long have we got? About 10 minutes. Is that right, Mrs. Wolfson?
Yes, whatever you like.
Yeah, okay, right. Okay. So Mordechai HaSadik says, and we said, he says, Im Tacharesh Tacharishi Ka'es Hazais, if you are quiet at this point. Why is he saying if you're quiet at this point? Because until now, quiet was the right thing to do. He told her not to say anything. But the word he uses for quiet isn't this word of being a humble or hatznias. He says, Tacharishi, if you just, if you're zipping your mouth in that sense, you're just not saying anything. It's the same word, by the way, as plowing, which is interesting. Okay, but if you're just, if you're going to just keep your mouth shut now, at this point, let me just find exactly right the pasuk is. I want to make it exactly right. Bear with me. Right, here we go. Don't imagine for yourselves to hide in the king's house, right? Which is a bit unreasonable because she wasn't thinking of that at all. If you are quiet now, there will be joy and salvation for the Jews from somewhere else, right? And he talks about this is why you're here, right? But Taima Esther Hashiva Mordechai, and Esther sends a message to Mordechai, right? Listen to this one. Lech kanais es kol haYehudim, gather all the Jews, hanimsa'im b'Shushan, and fast for me, and don't eat and no drink. Now, Rabbi Jacobson points out, it's a basic principle Chazal bring, that when the Torah says kol haYehudim, kol ha anything, all of the anything, it's assuming that otherwise there would be an exception, right? If she says to him, go and get the Jews in Shushan, then obviously she means all the Jews in Shushan. Why does it have to say kol? Because otherwise Mordechai would have thought she meant only some. And that's a basic principle of Torah. Whenever it says go and get all of the somethings, it's because if it hadn't said that, you would have assumed there's an exception. I'm not going to quote all the examples, probably because I don't know them all, but that's the exception. So what is Esther saying? What does she mean, go and get all the Jews? Mordechai was the Gadol Hador. He was the big tzaddik, he might have thought, possibly did, he was the one who did not join in the party, did not bow down. He held himself absolutely pristine the whole time around. There was no flies on him. He hadn't got anything wrong. When she said, go and get all the Jews, she meant even, not even the ones who've sinned, especially the ones who've sinned. Because Esther had been in the palace. She'd had a daily fight with the forces of evil in every sense. Chazal said that she was given pig fat to eat, right? So she at some point, no, she tried, once she was queen, she could get away with doing what she wanted a little bit, and she ate nuts and seeds. But at the point where she had to eat treif, she was there among the worst physical excesses of the time. So, whatever you think is going on these days, that was just as bad, if not worse. Okay, she knew what it was like to get it wrong. Or to be faced with awful, horrible, excesses and temptations to sin. She knew that was like. Whether she gave in or not, we don't, she didn't, obviously, but she knew what it was like. And she knew what it was like to feel like, oh my gosh, Hashem just doesn't love me anymore. I've ruined things. And when she told Mordechai, you go and you get all the Yidden, because she understood something. The Chazal tell us another situation. Chazal say, when you have a fast day, let's say there's a drought or something, and the Jewish people, and they would fast when there was no rain, right? Even these days, sometimes, if Chas Hashem, there's no rain, it's Israel, sometimes they call a fast for the Kehillah. But, there'll be a drought, or for anything else, if there is a fast day and everyone has to do teshuvah, say Chazal, it only worked if you had sinners in the congregation. This beautiful minyan of 10 very, very holy people who've never presumably done very much wrong isn't going to work. Hashem wants the people who've done it wrong in there too. Incredible concept. Before Yom Kippur, like the first bit of Yom Kippur davening, you say, we are making it lawful to daven Yom Kippur with sinners. I don't have Yom Kippur in Machzor in front of me, you can go and have a look it up. And one way we could possibly understand that is because otherwise you might think like Mordechai, well, hang on, it's Yom Kippur. We don't want anybody with us who's going to kind of spoil the look of the thing, right? Okay, here we all are dressed in white, trying to, to pray to Hashem to forgive us. We don't want people in here who've, made mistakes and coming in, not looking like us or not doing what we do. It says, no. We want everybody in there. What Esther says to Mordechai, incredible. She says, you go and get all of the Yidden. Go and get, we said, the Mechalashim, the ones who are weak from their own Averas, the ones who are hanging on at the outside. And the Pasuk tells us, Vayavar Mordechai passed over to go and get them. Now, one way of understanding that is he passed over, meaning like he crossed from where he was in the king's palace over to another area. But the other thing it means is Vayavar is from the words Avera. He went to get the people who'd done Averas, and he got them to fast as well, because everybody was in it all together. And that seems to have done the trick, doesn't it? Because what happens then? All these people who thought, well, maybe, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash because we did Averas, and now Haman's come to get us because we did more Averas. Maybe Hashem just is not interested in us anymore. Maybe we've just done too much. We're weak spiritually. We're tired spiritually. Hashem doesn't love us anymore. It says, no, nothing doing. You're the ones we want. You're the ones we want. You have to go inside. You have to look at that silence, that place that isn't about words. Because it's very, very easy to look at the words we speak and the deeds we do. But inside everybody, there is that silence, which is the neshama, that very nice, the wrong word, that calm, quiet, holy space that nothing can touch. Because you can't touch silence. You can criticize words because words are words, but silence is silence. There's nothing to get your hands on. It's just there. It's holy. It's pure. It's quiet. If you think about how you are sometimes, you see a beautiful sunset, ladies, or a stunning work of art, or if you ever heard a symphony play, right, a really beautiful piece of music, people don't clap straight away. As the last notes die away, what do you get? You get that silence, that piece of peace. And that piece of silence is what I'm putting this together a bit now, what Esther's looking for. Underneath all these, whatever Averas we've done, underneath whatever we think has gone wrong, behind all of that, there's this very quiet, small voices, the Mama Daka, this silence, this holding us, that's that and that. And when we access that, that's not going to get spoiled. And that's the bit that's always there. And Hashem says, I'm not abandoning you. Just go inside yourself and find yourself. And that's what he says to Esther, right? And Esther gets that. She says, I need there to fill us. I need there to fill us. I need them with me, and then I will have that strength. And we see what happens. Everyone fasts for her. Everyone joins together. Everybody, Sechazon, re-accepts. So in a way, it's like Shavuos, it's compared to Shavuos all over again. Everybody re-accepts their commitment to Hashem, but in the process, they re-accept that Hashem's committed to us, because it's never a one-way thing. So the words in the Megillah actually are Kimu v'Kiblu, they accepted. It's compared to Shavuos. We accepted our commitment to Hashem, accepted Hashem's commitments to us. So let's just put this all together because I'm very mindful of the time. Okay, so we said this period of the story, Purim story is happening in a period, the beginning of a period of darkness that just kind of gets darker, basically, right? We're in exile. There's no prophets. There's no obvious miracles. Even though, as you know, in the Purim story, in the Megillah, you don't actually get Hashem's name. It's hidden, okay? And into this Purim story comes something even worse. We said that, sorry, just bear with me a minute. As part of that darkness and a part of that no lack of clarity came a doubt, not that Hashem made the world, not that there were miracles in the past, but a doubt that is Hashem Hashem actually with us or not? Are we valuable to Hashem in the state we're in? And there was a couple of remedies to that. And it's not, and it's very interesting because Chazal tell us that in the days before, again, that state of abandonment of what are we going to do now is always a precursor for Geula, for being saved. So we're told at the end of days when Mashiach's on the way, one of the things that will happen is the Jewish people made bumper stickers. You don't think, right? That on the end of days, the only one we will rely on is Hashem. Will we feel abandoned from anything and everything? Okay, we talked about that. We talked about the more abandoned we feel, the closer we are to Geula. And we also said that the way to access our own spirituality and bring that salvation closer is by not giving in to this feeling that we're done for and because we did something wrong, or Hashem does it because we're in gullus and because we're not as pure as we used to be and not as perfect as we could be, therefore Hashem doesn't love us anymore, or because it looks like he's not here and it looks like we're abandoned, therefore Hashem doesn't love us. We go inside ourselves and we listen to ourselves. Not the bit that made the mistakes, everyone makes mistakes, the bit that's always going to be there, that's always pure, that's beyond the words and beyond the actions, that silent space where there's a space where we all have, and we realize that everybody's got their holiness, everyone's got what to offer, and we use that to reach out to Hashem like Esther does, like the people at the time did, like the people in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu when he held his hands up. That's the point where we reach out to Hashem, and at that Pasuk says, at that point Hashem answers us. So apparently there is a very, very strong inyan that because on Purim, right, it says, however it reaches out, stretches out his hand, you should give them. And we're told also when we stretch out our hand, as it were, to Hashem, it's a very, very special time to be answered. So I'm going to give you a bracha. Purim's coming up, Rosh Chodesh Adar, that all our tefillas coming from that place of knowing Hashem loves us should be answered.